Chapter 8 looks at ways that teachers can encourage students to think beyond just the simple facts in a text. So, to reflect on what they've read for the purpose of integrating new knowledge with old knowledge and testing the degree to which they find the new information valid and worth remembering. In some instances, these kinds of reflections can cause students to rethink what they previously held as supposed truth. And at other times, students may think of ideas or arguments that oppose those presented by an author or a textbook. When this happens, then we say that students are reading critically and they're applying their own set of criteria or another person's set of criteria for determining the truthfulness or validity of an author's argument. Important as they are to student engagement in general, cognitive and motivational factors alone cannot fully account for students' willingness to participate in academic tasks that require them to read subject matter text or textbooks. The culture of the classroom clearly plays a significant role in how readily students are willing to engage in reading and in post-reading discussion groups. Typically, small group discussions consist of 4 to 5 students. It could even be 3 to 5 students. And they work collaboratively on a related activity. Small group discussions may or may not involve assigning roles. Those roles can be, some examples are monitors, mediators, summarizers, and so on. So, peer-led either literature or learning circles or groups originated as a process for getting students to come together to read and discuss a common text. This grouping practice often makes use of materials other than books or textbooks. It has also been shown to stimulate students' interest in reading, for instance, if this is their second language. Such grouping typically includes some type of discussion director whose job it is to prepare a list of questions for the group to answer. In some cases, the teacher might want to go ahead and start with a particular group of discussion questions that they give the group. That just depends on the level of the students in the group. And then others in the group can assume roles like a connector, so that person would be responsible for connecting the text to everyday life or to other texts that have been read. Word or phrase finder, and so that person is responsible for dealing with vocabulary or other language in the text that's unusual. Illuminator, who is looking for sections of the text that are interesting that they can read aloud to the group, and so on. There are different options for these roles. Students alternate in these roles so that everyone has a responsibility for guiding the discussion in different ways at different times. Using a scaffold approach to instruction, teachers can model thinking aloud as they guide and support students to think about and think beyond a particular text. That text can be printed, visual, or digital. An important point to keep in mind as you're doing this reflective thinking is that it's not just for gifted and talented students or for those who are academically proficient. There's sufficient research to show that students of all ability levels can benefit from instruction in this type of higher level thinking. To create a reaction guide, you first identify a few key ideas that you want students to pursue in depth, and then you provide a set of directions that emphasize the importance of students being able to support their responses with evidence from the text, as well as their own experiences or maybe other texts they've read. And this can include visuals and digital text. So websites could be included in that, or maybe apps. Reading for different purposes challenges students to read beyond surface level understanding. It also encourages them to extend and elaborate on the ideas of their peers. Teachers who prefer to assign all students the same reading material will find that reading for different purposes is well suited for their needs. However, after reading the common material, students break into groups for the purpose of tackling different tasks that are all related to the same text. Discussion webs present central questions that students must address by looking at both sides of an issue. They must compile evidence that it supports their reasoning, and the evidence can be obtained from reading the text or visiting websites, viewing videos, listening to others or to videos, and so on. Discussion webs help to structure discussions in such a way that more students have an opportunity to contribute than normally would if a less structured approach was used. The interact procedure can be used to guide reflection in most content areas. It gets its name from the inferred intrapersonal dialogue that takes place within individuals who are engaged in self-actualization. So today we see it being used in classrooms as useful as a way to encourage students to reflect on what they've read, and in particular to predict how the meanings they have constructed of a particular text are likely to mirror or be different from meanings constructed by others. And this is a particularly good activity to use with language learners. You can see this blank worksheet for the interact procedure on the screen. And for example, in your class, you could generate a set of 4 value statements that could be used to accompany a short article or a short piece of text that you give your students. And then after you've generated the statements, they divide into groups of 3 and record whether they agree or disagree with each statement, and then compare the responses for a whole class discussion. So reading for different purposes, the discussion web, and the interact all require students to consider competing points of view. Noting an author's point of view and taking this into account is a characteristic of critical literacy. With few exceptions, however, students at middle and high school levels are seldom encouraged to really take this reflective critical stance. So think about how you could bring this effectively to your classroom. Teaching students how to analyze both online and offline or traditional text to develop an awareness of how, why, and whose interest the particular text might work is part of teaching critical literacy. A pedagogical framework for building this kind of awareness is the 4 resources model, and that is code breaker, meaning maker, text user, and text analyst. So the code breaker refers to decoding, meaning maker to composing or comprehending a message, text user understand and acts on the function of the text structure or tone, and then the analyst unpacks maybe the economic or political assumptions of the text in order to understand the message. Although the ability to decode and comprehend what is learned from and with the text is a common expectation in most of the content area classrooms, the capacity to analyze how different text position different readers in different ways is not common. This is unfortunate given that the increasing number of newcomers to today's schools would seem to point to the necessity for considering how individuals from different cultural backgrounds see themselves represented or not represented in the textbooks that they are required to read. So, developing students' critical awareness through literacy practices that engage them interpreting and evaluating all forms of text, whether that's print, image, verbal, non print. This is an important aspect of guided response to reading. Critical literacy entails developing an awareness of how power circulates in all kinds of text and relationships with people, especially when the norm, or what seems normal or natural, favors those who have authority over others. To read critically is to go well beyond responding to just words on a page. Teaching critical literacy is a way of ensuring that students consider how texts are taken up and put to use for the benefit of some, but not for all people. It also gives us a way to engage students in analyzing media text and audience for whom those texts are produced. When you're teaching for critical literacy awareness, one or more of the following goals is usually at stake, and that's to motivate students, to facilitate students thinking about the decisions that the authors make, and then encourage multiple reading of the same text from different perspectives.